Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Ice Maiden by B.D. Smith, narrated by Stephen Caffrey. Prologue. The Fox. Winter had come early to central Maine, and the ice was a good foot thick in many places by the beginning of the ice fishing season. Under a gibbous moon, clusters of fishing shacks were scattered across Sebec Lake, and snowmobile headlights carved occasional slow arcs through the January night. At about 8:30, Gary and Maureen Griggs left Greeley's Landing on the south shore of Sebec, heading for their shack west of the Narrows. There were other public boat ramps on Sebec, but because of its proximity to Dover-Foxcroft, the county seat and largest town in Piscataquis County, Greeley's Landing had been the lake's major access point for boating and ice fishing for more than a century. Gary had caught a few good-sized lake trout and salmon a few days earlier, and with a fresh pail of emerald shiners, he had high hopes for another good night of fishing. Riding behind Gary on the snowmobile, his wife Maureen encircled his waist with her arms and tucked her hands up under his coat for warmth. They made good progress north, up along the shore, past the shuttered shoreline cottages on their left. The ice was snow-covered, and there was little wind. As they turned left and passed through the Narrows, with the dark forest closing in on both sides, Maureen suddenly squeezed Gary's ample belly and called into his ear, "What's that rusty red thing ahead, off to the left?" Gary slowed and turned the snowmobile toward the dim red shape in the distance. As they got closer, the snowmobile's headlight lit up a red fox far out from shore, standing with its head down, intent on something on the ice. Gary had been delivering propane for Robinson Oil out of Dover-Foxcroft for almost 20 years, and he had seen plenty of red foxes rushing across the road in front of his truck during that time. They could also occasionally be seen, during the winter months, running across the frozen lake in the daytime, but he had never seen one on the lake at night, or standing still, like this one. Maybe it snapped a fish from one of the ice shacks, Gary thought, as they approached the fox. He expected it to run as soon as the headlight hit it, but the fox continued to gnaw at something on the ice as they came closer. A rabid fox had been reported earlier in the fall up around Willimantic, at the western end of the lake, and just as Gary decided to veer off out of caution, the fox turned and ran into the darkness toward the safety of the south shore. "What was it doing?" Maureen asked as the snowmobile reached the spot where the fox had been standing. "Not sure," replied Gary. Getting off the snowmobile, he walked into the headlight's beam, puzzled by what he saw on the ice. Two planks had been laid side by side, flat on the ice, and in the narrow gap that separated them, what appeared to be 4 white sticks protruded up through the snow. The 2 larger sticks were about an inch in diameter and spaced about a foot apart, with the 2 smaller diameter sticks each almost touching the larger ones. Gary knelt and saw that the sticks were in fact bones, with the ends gnawed down by the fox and probably other scavengers before it. Looking closer, Gary saw that low mounds of flesh still encircled the bones at the ice surface, and it dawned on him what he was looking at. Someone's body had been inserted head first down through the ice and then held in place by the 2 boards until the ice refroze. He was looking at what was left of a person's lower legs. Scavengers had removed the feet and were working their way down toward the knees. Gary turned to Maureen. "Hand me your phone, hon," he said. "It looks like we've got a corpse." 1. Bower Bank. About 8 miles east of where Gary was dialing 911, in the dispersed North Shore community of Bower Bank, population 120, Douglas Bateman was watching Monday Night Football. Tom Brady had just completed his 5th consecutive pass in the Patriots' opening drive of the second half. The sound was off, and Doug divided his time between the game and gazing out the window toward Pine Island, located about a half-mile west of his lakeside house. He wondered if the eagle pair that had nested there for more than a decade would be returning in the spring. The Pine Island eagles had held a special significance for Doug and his wife Beth, as the pair first appeared the same year they had moved into their North Shore home with their newborn son Eric. Each spring, the Batemans eagerly anticipated the return of the eagles to Pine Island from their winter range. Once they arrived, Doug and Beth would take turns watching them through binoculars for the first glimpse of an eaglet's head over the rim of the nest. When he was 4, Eric joined his parents in watching for the first appearance of the baby eagles, and from then on, he was always the first to see them. It became a family tradition. Soon after Eric announced the presence of eaglets in the nest each year, the summer sky over the lake would be filled with the fledglings' piercing cries whenever they recognized one of their parents approaching with food. Later in the summer, Doug and Beth and their son would laugh together at the clumsy first efforts at flight by the young eagles, and their frequent crash landings into the trees on Pine Island. And then, when the young eagles had become proficient and soared high above the lake with their parents, the Batemans would know that the end of summer was fast approaching. In another month or so, the first turning of the leaves would mark the eagles' imminent departure. A year ago last August, however, Doug and Beth's world changed forever with the death of their son. Like generations of teenagers growing up in the area, Eric had joined in the summer ritual of jumping off the bridge in Sebec Village, located at the east end of the lake, where it narrowed dramatically to form the Sebec River, the lake's only outlet. The bridge spanned the deep pool formed just upstream from a small hydroelectric dam, and on hot summer days, the bridge and the cold water below would draw dozens of teens, showing off and comparing suntans and tattoos. No one saw Eric jump from the bridge that Saturday afternoon in August, but he was soon missed by the group of friends he was with. His body was pulled from the water later that day, and his death was judged to be another of the tragic accidents that far too often seemed to strike the close-knit communities of central Maine. The blunt force trauma to the side of his head was determined to have been caused by impact with the bridge or by hitting a submerged rock. Doug and Beth tried to go on, but as the days grew shorter, the surrounding forest grew darker, and winter set in. Beth left the memories and their home on the North Shore and moved back to town. At about the same time that Beth moved in with her sister in Dover Foxcroft, a developer from the Boston area acquired Pine Island and transformed the long-abandoned cottage located close to the base of the eagle's nesting tree into a summer rental. The next spring, for the first time in a decade, the eagles failed to return to the nest. Doug wasn't sure if they ever would. As Doug turned his attention back to the televised Patriots game, a barking dog ringtone indicated an incoming call from his partner, Tom Richard. Doug let the call go to voicemail, but reached over and picked up his phone when the unanswered call was followed by a text message. "Pick up your phone, asshole. It looks like we might have a homicide up there at Sebec." Doug and Tom were two of the 20 detectives in the Maine State Police Major Crimes Unit. The MCU investigated all suspicious deaths, homicides, child abuse cases, and other major crimes that occurred outside of the state's two largest cities, Portland and Bangor. Doug and Tom both worked out of the Orono Barracks, about 45 minutes away from Doug's home on Sebec Lake. Doug pushed the return call button. "What's the story, Rocket?" "A call just came in from the Piscataquis County Sheriff's Office. One of their investigators is responding to a report of a body in the ice. It was called in by someone out ice fishing close to a place called Greeley's Landing. You know it?" "Yeah, I know it," replied Doug. "Are you sure it's not a prank? They can get drinking pretty heavy out on the lake, and sometimes like to have a little fun with the local law enforcement." "That sounds legit. The caller identified himself. A Gary Griggs." "I know Gary. He's not one to joke about something like this." Maybe you should get over there before they fuck things up," suggested Tom. "Their guys are experienced. I think it can wait till tomorrow. Let him see what it is." "I don't know, Doug. The deputy who called me said it was a new investigator, someone from away. He sounded amused." "Sweet Jesus," replied Doug. "Just what we need. Someone eager to make their mark." "Okay, I will head over there. Ask him to have someone meet me at the boat ramp. I'm 15 minutes away across the lake, but my sled is over in Milo getting a new fuel pump, so I'll have to drive the long way around. Should take almost an hour." Doug turned on the outside lights and stepped out the back door, heading for the garage. His home had started out as a small summer cottage built by his grandfather in the 1940s. Like most places on the north shore of the lake, it was for many years accessible only by boat. By the mid-1960s, a fire road and electricity had finally reached the cottage, and following his granddad's death, Doug's father had expanded and winterized it, turning it into a year-round home for his family. When they took it over, following his parents' death, Doug and his wife Beth had in turn made improvements to the main house and added a large barn-like garage. It had room for Beth's Subaru, Doug's 1987 Jeep Cherokee, and a variety of watercraft, including kayaks, a canoe, a beat-up aluminum 14-foot outboard, and Doug's Woody, a vintage 1952 17-foot Chris Craft Sportsman inboard. Doug's Cherokee pulled up to the boat ramp at Greeley's Landing just shy of 10 p.m. A Piscataquis County Sheriff SUV and a Dover Foxcroft police cruiser were parked in the darkness with their motors running, along with a dark green Toyota Land Cruiser with Michigan plates. Doug admired the Toyota as he got out of the Jeep. He guessed it was a 50s series, probably dating to the mid-70s, and looked to be in great condition. 2 snowmobiles had been unloaded from a trailer hitched to the back of the SUV. Maureen and Gary Griggs were seated in the back of the county sheriff SUV, and a uniformed sheriff's deputy and a Dover Foxcroft police officer leaned against its front fender, watching the Cherokee approach. As he climbed out of the Jeep, an attractive, athletic woman with short blonde hair walked toward him with her hand outstretched. "You must be with the state police. I'm Ann Quinn, investigator with the county sheriff's office. Thanks for getting here so quickly. We welcome your assistance in this matter." Doug glanced over to where the two officers were listening to them, saw their slightly amused expressions, and taking the outstretched hand in his, replied, "I'm Doug Bateman with the State Major Crimes Unit. Can we sit in your car while we talk?" Once seated in the Land Cruiser, out of earshot of the two officers, Doug turned to Anne. "I live in Bowerbank up on the North Shore," Doug said quietly. "So it didn't take me long to get here, once I got the call from Orono. I grew up here, went to high school here, and know pretty much everybody, including Jim Torben and Barry Volkman, the two uniforms over there. They're both good men, but like maybe too many people in this community, they have sort of a chip on their shoulder, and it can take a while for them to warm up to people who aren't from around here. You don't even have to be from out of state. People from down on the coast are still considered outsiders. People talk, word gets around, and it won't take long for the story to circulate about how you and I butted heads over this case. If it turns out to be a case. I would like to avoid that. If there is a dead body out there in the ice, a suspicious death, a homicide, then it's my case. The MCU investigates all suspicious deaths and homicides statewide, except for those that occur within the city limits of Bangor and Portland. We count on and expect the cooperation of local law enforcement, and you have an important part to play in this investigation. We can work together as a team, and I will make sure you get a lot of responsibility and get ample credit in the case. But it's my case." Anne looked at him and smiled slightly. "Quite a speech. Sounds good. Where do we start?" Somewhat surprised, Doug smiled in return. "Have you interviewed Gary and Maureen?" he asked. "And have you been out on the ice to look at the body?" "I talked to the couple, but we haven't gone out to the scene yet. Apparently they approached within about 30 feet on their snowmobile, and he briefly got off to look, but otherwise the scene is undisturbed." "Okay, good. First thing, let's have Gary take us to the body, and then they can go home. We don't want them to talk to anyone about what they saw out here tonight. We can get a formal statement from them tomorrow. If it does turn out to be a body, a suspicious death, Jim and Barry can go around to the fishing shacks tonight and get names and contact information from everyone out here. Some of them have been drinking while fishing, so it's better to wait till tomorrow or the next day to ask about who or what they may have seen out on the lake over the last few weeks. Barry is Dover Foxcroft Police, and it's not their case, but I'll bet he won't mind helping on a homicide, if that's what it is. He has probably been mostly doing domestic dispute calls and DUI stops lately, so this will be a welcome change for him." Anne nodded agreement, and Doug opened the car door, looking back and saying, "Okay, let's go. You do the talking." Doug greeted the two officers and Maureen and Gary by name, shook hands all around, and stood silently beside Anne as she asked Gary to lead them back out on the ice. She instructed Jim to stay with Maureen until they got back in off the lake, and asked Barry if he might be interested in helping with the investigation by joining Jim in determining who owned the fishing shacks. Barry agreed, and Anne led the way over to the snowmobiles. Before Doug could ask if she had ever driven a snowmobile, Anne mounted the nearest one, started it up, pulled on the knit cap, and raised the hood on her coat. As he straddled the other snowmobile, Doug turned to Jim. "This won't take long, 15 minutes at most." Anne and Doug followed Gary out onto the lake, through the Narrows, and they soon reached the spot where Maureen and Gary had found the bones embedded in the ice. Without getting off the snowmobile, Doug illuminated it with his flashlight and asked Anne, "What do you think?" "Definitely human," Anne responded, over the sound of the idling snowmobiles. "Paired tibias and fibulas. Too small for moose or bear. Too big for a dog or other mammal." Doug turned to Gary. "You and Maureen can head home. And please, keep this to yourselves for now. We'll set up an interview with you for tomorrow." Gary nodded, turned his snowmobile, and headed back to Greeley's Landing. Anne looked toward the darkness of the South Shore. "The victim's footwear could be around here somewhere, if the scavengers haven't carried the feet off. We might be able to track the foxes in the snow." Doug nodded, extracted his cell phone from deep in a pocket of his coat, and called Orono. "Hey, Rocket, I'm out on the lake with Ann Quinn, the county sheriff investigator, and we have a body embedded in the ice. Can you call Vassalboro and Augusta and see if they can get a dive team and an evidence response team up here tomorrow, and also contact the chief medical examiner's office?" "I'll call right now. Wish I could join you on this, but they still have me stuck on desk duty because of that perv. Shouldn't be long now, Tom. You'll be back out on the street any time." Despite his encouragement, Doug wasn't all that sure that Tom, his longtime partner and good friend, would be freed from a desk assignment any time soon. Tom's nickname was Rocket, both because he was rumored to be the nephew of Maurice the Rocket Richard, the legendary right wing of the Montreal Canadiens, and because he had a very short fuse when dealing with suspects accused of crimes against children and women. The Rocket had grown up in the tight-knit Acadian communities of the St. Johns River Valley around Fort Kent in northern Maine, right on the Canadian border. He had boxed in college and did pretty well in the Golden Gloves heavyweight division before joining the Navy after graduation, where he served a 6-year enlistment in some sort of special ops unit. In spite of all his military training, however, he still displayed a lack of self-control in some situations, and had the physical skills to inflict significant damage in a short period of time. A few months back, while off duty, Tom had run across and recognized a suspect in a major child pornography case who had been on the run for several months. There had been no witnesses to the arrest, and Tom asserted that the suspect had resisted, requiring him to respond accordingly, resulting in the suspect sustaining a broken jaw, split lip, and bruised kidneys. It didn't help that Tom's long-standing on-and-off affair with the wife of a prominent state politician had recently been made public, and that the cuckolded politician had friends in the state police. Tom Richard lived in a small mid-century modern home on the Penobscot River, just north of Old Town, a short commute from the state police barracks at Orono. He was never without female companionship, due both to his good looks and outgoing nature, but also because he was a good listener, a trait that served him equally well when he was interrogating a suspect or sharing a romantic candlelit dinner with his most recent companion, a visiting professor of French literature from the Sorbonne. She was charmed by his Quebecois dialect, by his extensive knowledge of neighborhoods on the left bank in Paris, and his ability to truly listen to what she was saying. After pocketing his cell phone, Doug turned to Anne. "Let's start the canvass of the ice shacks. We also need to find someone to stay out on the ice to keep scavengers and curious locals away overnight. I have a few people I can try, and we can ask Jim and Barry if they have any ideas." 2. Below the ice. almost 5 hours north of Boston and 3 hours from Portland and the coastal tourist trade, Sebec Lake is beyond easy reach of out-of-state summer weekend cottagers. At just over 11 miles in length and 2 miles wide at its widest point, it also lacks the destination appeal of the much larger Moosehead Lake, located 45 minutes farther north. As a result, much of Sebec's shoreline remains undeveloped, and the 900 or so year-round homes and cottages, or camps, that are tucked back in the forests that border its rocky shores are mostly owned by Mainers, along with a few summer people who make the long drive each year from as far away as Arizona and New Mexico. There are only a handful of short-term rental cottages on the lake, and the few viable motels mostly border Peaks Kenny State Park, which boasts great views of Boarstone Mountain and one of the best sandy beaches in the state. Although jet skiers are a weekend irritant, particularly at the east end of the lake closer to the dam, lake traffic is light compared to Lake Sebago to the south, and consists mostly of canoes and kayaks, small outboards, and stately patio boats, along with far fewer, larger inboards, often pulling tubes of youngsters, shrieking with excitement. At night, campfires flicker along the shore, and the sound of voices carries far out across the water. About 20 minutes south of Sebec Lake, downtown Dover-Foxcroft, the closest town, is the county seat, or shire town, of Piscataquis County. Up until they merged in 1922, Dover and Foxcroft had been two separate towns located on opposite banks of the Piscataquis River. Dover-Foxcroft is perhaps best known to the outside world as the home of the Whoopie Pie Festival, a one-day event that brings about 5,000 people into town each year in late June, effectively doubling the town's population. Otherwise, there is little in Dover-Foxcroft that caters to the tourist trade. The American Pizzeria Appreciation Society named it Pizzatown, USA, in 2014, based on it having more pizza restaurants per citizen than any other municipality in the country. And up until the Center Theater Coffee House opened in 2015, there was no place in town to buy a latte or cappuccino. Doug Bateman often stopped at the coffee house in the morning on his way to work in Orono, not just for a latte, but also because his estranged wife, Beth, now managed it, and his morning stops kept her in his life, at least marginally. On the morning after the discovery of the Ice Maiden, as she would eventually be called by the media, however, Doug instead picked up a coffee at the Sebec Country Store so he could buy the Bangor paper to see if there was any mention of the body discovered the previous day. After picking up the coffee and paper, he texted Ann Quinn to let her know he was 30 minutes out from Greeley's Landing. Doug was hoping that there would be no replay of last summer's drama, when Robert Burton killed his ex-girlfriend just south of Guilford, the next town over, and then hid out in the woods for much of the summer. Despite an extensive manhunt by local and state police, and the brief involvement of the FBI, Burton evaded capture for 68 days before turning himself in. He had been sighted numerous times over the summer along hiking trails and back roads, and media coverage had been nonstop. Large digital message signs along the roads into the area warned drivers of the murderer on the loose, and along with every other law enforcement officer within a 100-mile radius, Doug Bateman had suffered through 2 months of increasingly irritating questions about why Burton was still at.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?